The fighting type is notorious for having many strong attackers that require very little energy to start applying pressure. The identity of the fighting type has always been to strike hard, strike fast, and do it without any real gimmicks or secondary effects. The fighting type has produced some of the most dominant cards a Pokemon TCG has ever seen, and today we'll be looking at some of the best fighting type Pokemon of all time and why they're so powerful. And at number 10, we have Machamp from Diamond and Pearl Stormfront. This card has a total of 3 attacks. Its first attack, Takeout, deals 40 damage for 1 fighting energy, or alternatively, knocks out the defending Pokemon immediately if it's a basic Pokemon. Hurricane requires 2 colorless energies and flips 4 coins. For each of these coins that lands on heads, this attack deals 30 damage. And its last attack, Rage, has a cost of 2 fighting and 2 colorless, and deals 60 damage plus 10 more extra for each damage counter in Machamp. Most of the time, Takeout was the attack of choice, and also the reason why Machamp made it onto our list of the strongest turn 1 win conditions. Back when Stormfront was released, the rules of the Pokemon trading card game looked very different. The player going first could not only attach an energy card, but was able to attack as well. Whereas today, the player going first can play any cards except supporters, but isn't able to attack. Another change that has since been introduced was for the item Rare Candy. Today, players have to wait 1 turn to use Rare Candy in one of their basic Pokemon to evolve it into a Stage 2 Pokemon from their hand. Back then, it could be used immediately to evolve a basic into an either Stage 2 or a Stage 1 Pokemon. This rule change was very relevant for cards like Machamp, as the player going second could simply evolve a Machop into a Machamp on their first turn and start attacking with Takeout. And since your opponent didn't have any way to evolve in their first turn, any Pokemon they had in play could be knocked out. At least as long as they didn't have an effect on them that prevented Takeout's effect from working. Many times when Machamp decks were facing decks that didn't play a lot of basic Pokemon, or Pokemon with attacks that would search a deck for more basic Pokemon, games would immediately end in favor of the Machamp player if your opponent didn't have any Pokemon remaining in play. Even if there were more Pokemon remaining, the early pressure Machamp could often bring a tempo advantage that was hard to recover from. These decks were definitely what you would refer to as glass cannon decks, as Machamp's strength was purely for the early game. Hurricane wasn't a very reliable attack due to its coin flips, and would usually end up doing an average of 60 damage, which couldn't keep up with many other top tier attackers back then. Rage could have been useful if it wasn't for its hefty energy cost. Overall, Machamp will go down as one of the most iconic fast-paced decks, and its high potential of winning games in the first turn without any real counterplay. And at number 9, we have Donphan Prime from Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Its exoskeleton Pokebody reduces any damage done to it by 20. Earthquake deals 60 damage for 1 energy and deals 10 damage to each of your bench Pokemon. For 3 fighting energies, Heavy Impact deals 90 damage. Now, what made Donphan good was that at the time of its release, it came with the full package that was required for a Pokemon card to be great. The magic number of HP at the time was 130. And in combination with Exoskeleton, its 120 HP turned into 140 HP in terms of potential opposing one-hit knockouts. If your opponent had to invest even more than 1 attack, its Pokebody adds up even more and makes Donphan an amazing tanky attacker. Most of the time, these kinds of tanky attackers require some time to get going, but thanks to Earthquake's 1 energy cost, Donphan was able to deal relevant damage really quickly. As previously mentioned, the number to hit the point was 130, which meant that Donphan could knock out every Pokemon below that HP threshold in 2 hits, and with the help of damage modifiers could even pick up those with slightly more HP. Heavy Impact was rarely used, but still provided Donphan with a potential attack that could deal higher damage, without having to damage your own bench. In addition to great stats on its card and attacks, the fighting type is usually one of the best types in the game, thanks to multiple other types being weak to it. As the game progressed and transitioned into the Black and White era, Donphan's power level was decreased by a bit due to more Pokemon being printed with higher HP and higher damage outputs. But thanks to its cheap attack cost on Earthquake, it still found its way into various decks that made use of multiple easy-to-use attackers to cover different weaknesses. At the 2011 World Championship, it even ended up making it all the way to the finals. Throughout the 2012 season, Pokemon EX were introduced to the game with up to 180 HP, making it hard for Donphan to keep up. On top of that, stronger fighting Pokemon were introduced, causing Donphan to lose even more identity as the primary go-to fighting Pokemon to deal with fighting weak Pokemon like Zekrom EX and Darkrai EX. It never got fully phased out of the meta, but also wasn't able to ever come back to the top due to the mid-Black and White era power creep. It's still one of the most iconic fighting Pokemon of all time, and got an honorary printed in the 25th anniversary celebration set. And at number 8, we have Terrakion from Black and White Noble Victories. Its Retaliate attack deals 30 damage for 1 fighting and 1 colorless energy, but if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an opposing Pokemon during the last turn, it deals an additional 60 damage. For 2 fighting energies and 1 colorless, Land Crush deals 90 damage. Now, when this card first got released, it didn't immediately have a pop-off start like some of the other cards in this list. But players still realized how strong its 130 HP paired with 2 cheap energy cost 90 damage attacks were. At first, it was mostly included in pre-existing decks as a one-off to cover additional type weaknesses and have a cheap return attack if something got knocked out. Things really started to roll for Terrakion when Next Destinies introduced Pokemon EX. Previously, decks had to exclusively rely on one prize Pokemon in order to win the game, so cards like Terrakion that couldn't easily knock them out in one hit were decent in certain situations, but not amazing as they didn't advance the prize trade in your favor. With the introduction of two prize Pokemon that Terrakion could knock out in 2 hits, it became a much more appealing attacking option. Most prominently, it was paired together with the new best card in the game, Mewtwo EX. For 2 colorless energies, its X-Ball attack deals 20 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. Its colorless typing allowed it to perfectly include a variety of different attackers, as you weren't forced to run basic psychic energies. The most popular deck to make use of this combination at the time was the Celebi/Mewtwo/Tornadus deck, which made use of Celebi Prime's Forest Breath Pokepower to attach a grass energy to one of your bench Pokemon when Celebi is in the active spot to power up various good attackers that had colorless energy requirements. Tornadus from Emerging Powers has the Hurricane attack that deals 80 damage and forces you to move an energy from it to one of your bench Pokemon, helping with conserving some of your energies. Normally, this deck would consist of those 3 Pokemon in addition to support Pokemon. Because it normally only had to run basic grass energies and double colorless energies, it was easy to fit in a couple of fighting energies into Terrakion in order to get another great attacker. Terrakion became so good at the time that a deck that only ran 4 copies of Terrakion won a state championship. It became even better with the set release of Dark Explorers. Darkrai EX is one of the best cards from the new set, and its fighting weakness made Terrakion even more appealing as a tech option. Just like before, most top decks tried to incorporate Terrakion, and the trinity of broken cards in Mewtwo EX, Darkrai EX, and Terrakion even managed to take down the 2012 World Championships. New releases in the upcoming year eventually led to Terrakion being phased out of the game, but it will forever be known as one of the most influential fighting types ever. And at number 7, we have Lycanroc GX from Sun and Moon Guardians Rising. Its ability, Bloodthirsty Eyes, lets you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon when you put this Pokemon into play. For 1 fighting energy and 2 colorless, its Claw Slash deals 110 damage. Lastly, its GX attack, Dangerous Rogue GX, deals 50 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon in play and requires 1 fighting energy and 1 colorless energy. When this card was first introduced to the game, it didn't immediately have an impact. While an ability like Bloodthirsty Eyes always gets noticed by players because these gusting abilities have always seen some kind of success, what kept Lycanroc GX away from having immediate success was the fact that supporter cards that allowed you to switch your opponent's Pokemon around were still legal, which is usually not a reason for complete exclusion, but it significantly helps if an ability is one of the few ways to do so. The much bigger reason was the prevalence of the Grass-type Pokemon in the format that could easily knock out Lycanroc in one hit, and the lack of fighting weak Pokemon in order for Claw Slash to be relevant enough. Dangerous Rogue was still a good attack at the time, but aside from some low-tier niche decks, no deck really had room to run Lycanroc GX. This changed a few sets later with Shining Legends. Zoroark GX was what finally brought Lycanroc into the spotlight. Its trade ability lets you discard a card from your hand to draw 2 new ones, and its Riotous Beating attack deals 20 damage for each of your Pokemon in play and requires 2 colorless energies. Not needing a specific type of basic energies while also providing consistency made Zoroark GX incredibly versatile, and it can be paired with basically anything. On top of providing an excellent skeleton to put Lycanroc GX into and benefit from its ability and GX attack, Zoroark being weak to fighting also made Lycanroc GX a more appealing tech option for other decks. Only 1 set later in Sun and Moon Crimson Invasion, another great fighting type Pokemon got introduced to the game, Buzzwole GX. Its Jet Punch attack deals 30 damage to defending Pokemon and 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for 1 fighting energy. For 3 fighting energies, Knuckle Impact deals 160 damage, but this Pokemon can't use Knuckle Impact during the next turn. Its GX attack, Absorption GX, also requires 3 fighting energies and deals 40 damage for each of your remaining prize cards. While Zoroark decks found other great partners, Lycanroc GX became the prime partner for Buzzwole GX, and for the rest of the season, both archetypes remained at the top of the game. With more sets being released, Lycanroc GX moved down more and more in popularity with Zoroark decks, but considering that it was still relevant occasionally and still the main way to play Buzzwole with, it can definitely be said that it kept a spot amongst the tier 1 decks. And at number 6, we have Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX from Sword and Shield Battle Styles. Its Gale Thrust attack deals 30 damage for 1 energy, but if this Pokemon became your active Pokemon during this turn, it deals an additional 120 damage. Gmax Rapid Flow requires 2 fighting and 1 colorless energy, and you have to discard all energies attached to this Pokemon in order to use this attack. It then deals 120 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon in play. Its 330 HP also puts it among the Pokemon with some of the highest HP ever. When Battle Styles first came out, most people were expecting its Single Strike counterpart from the same set to take over the meta. Single Strike Urshifu VMAX's Gmax 1 Blow attack deals 270 damage for 3 fighting energies and 1 colorless, and just like Gmax Rapid Flow, forces you to discard all cards attached to this Pokemon. When paired up with damage modifiers like Single Strike Energy, an energy that provides fighting and darkness energy to a Single Strike Pokemon it's attached to, and also makes the attack deal 20 more damage, this attack can quickly ramp up to knock out Pokemon with more than 300 HP. When these cards came out, 3 prize VMAX Pokemon ruled the meta, and most players expected this one-shot strategy to take over the meta and claim the top spot. Once players started playing around with both Urshifu VMAXs, they quickly realized the incredible potential that the Rapid Strike version had. Having high amounts of HP paired with an incredibly powerful low energy attack and Gale Thrust made it a prime partner for Cheryl, a support card from the same set that heals all of your Pokemon in play if you discard all energies attached to them. Even dealing with its Psychic weakness wasn't an issue thanks to Terrakion GX from Sun and Moon Unified Minds. As long as it's in play, its Psychic Zone ability removes the Psychic weakness from all Pokemon in play. Even with the healing capabilities of Cheryl in mind, this deck could still make use of Gmax Rapid Flow with relative ease. The main support for the strategy was the Rapid Strike counterpart to Single Strike Energy. Rapid Strike Energy provides the Rapid Strike Pokemon it's attached to with 2 energies in any combination of water and fighting. Paired with the Karate Belt tool card, this attack could be used for just 1 energy attachment. When a Karate Belt is attached to a Pokemon while you're behind in prize cards, it provides the Pokemon with 1 of its fighting energy costs. Soon after, with the release of Chilling Reign, players started pairing Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX with the Inteleon line. Unlike most support Pokemon, or Stage 2 Pokemon in general, every single piece of its evolution line was a core part in Urshifu's success. Sobble from Chilling Reign provided the attack with incredible setup thanks to its Keep Calling attack. For 1 colorless energy, it lets you search your deck for up to 3 Rapid Strike Pokemon and puts them into your bench. Drizzle from Sword and Shield has the Shady Dealings ability that lets you search your deck for a trainer card when you put it into play. Inteleon from Sword and Shield has the same ability but lets you pick up 2 trainer cards instead. Lastly, Inteleon from Chilling Reign has the Quick Shooting ability, which lets you put 2 damage counters onto one of your opponent's Pokemon once per turn. This combination of Urshifu VMAX and Inteleon remained the main way to play it, until the Sword and Shield card to Drizzle and Inteleon eventually rotated out in April of 2023. Even after rotation, Urshifu found its way back into the meta, and while it's not near the top as it used to be, it's still a competitively viable deck in 2023, already establishing as one of the greatest fighting Pokemons of all time. And at number 5, we've got Buzzwole GX from Sun and Moon Crimson Invasion, which we talked about already, but let's refresh your memory. Its Jet Punch attack deals 30 damage to defending Pokemon and 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for 1 fighting energy. For 3 fighting energies, Knuckle Impact deals 160 damage, but this Pokemon can't use Knuckle Impact during the next turn. Its GX attack, Absorption GX, also requires 3 fight energies and deals 40 damage for each of your remaining prize cards. The first tournament that featured Crimson Invasion was the European International Championship in November 2017. Buzzwole GX immediately made an impact with the surprise of many players, and multiple decks featured it as their main attacker ended up making it to the top 8 of the tournament. While it needed a lot of energies for its Absorption GX and Knuckle Impact attacks, Jet Punch was able to provide good enough early game pressure by dealing 30 damage to active Pokemon into 1 bench Pokemon. Especially when combined with cards like Strong Energy that added 20 damage to attacks from fighting Pokemon, and Choice Band that added 30 damage to attacks done to GX Pokemon, Buzzwole GX could quickly add pressure with multiple Pokemon at once for decent damage. Even powering up its higher energy cost attacks wasn't incredibly difficult. Max Elixir checked the top 6 cards of the deck for basic energies and attached them to a bench Pokemon. Because of Absorption GX's high damage output in the early game, dealing 40 damage for each of your remaining prize cards, it was often used to initiate the prize trade, unlike many other GX attacks that were used in later stages of the game. Afterward, Knuckle Impact with its basic damage output of 160 would be able to apply even more pressure, or in combination with the previously mentioned modifiers, pick up KOs all by itself. Multiple good attacks in combination with the base HP of 190 gave this card an incredibly strong stat line to begin with. The main reason for it being overlooked was its weakness to Psychic, which was among the best types in the game during its release, but eventually turned out to not be a high enough hindrance to stop it from being played. At first, Buzzwole GX was played in hyper-aggressive decks that tried to overwhelm opposing strategies with high-pressure attacks, but towards the end of its lifespan it also found its way into slower strategies, proving how versatile even a card that looks as one-dimensional as this card could be. And at number 4, we've got Landorus EX from Black and White Boundaries Cross. Its Hammerhead deals 30 damage for 1 fight energy and also deals 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. For 2 fighting energies and 1 colorless, its Land's Judgment deals 80 damage, but if you discard all fighting energies attached to it, it deals an additional 70 damage. Interestingly enough, even with a very good early game attack in Hammerhead and a strong finisher attack in Land's Judgment, Landorus EX never became the primary attacker for any deck. Instead, it was used by many decks that already ran fighting energies or could easily include them as a solid tech against fighting weak Pokemon, or to set up bench Pokemon for future knockouts. You might wonder why a card that wasn't even the main attacker in many decks is this high up on this list. And the reason for that is that it wasn't just used in a few decks at the time, it was used in almost every deck. The main reason why it was so good at the time was that the 2 best cards at the time were Darkrai EX and Mewtwo EX. Mewtwo's X-Ball attack deals 20 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon, which made it vulnerable against strong attackers that didn't require a lot of energies themselves. By using Hammerhead for just one energy, it became hard for Mewtwo EX decks to deal relevant damage early on. In Darkrai EX's case, it's much simpler because it's weak to fighting, which made Landorus EX a good option for decks trying to keep up with the two of them, but also to pair with themselves. Throughout the next couple of sets, its popularity decreased a bit, but especially with Darkrai EX still being very relevant, many decks still chose to play Landorus EX as a valuable attacker. To put into perspective how good Hammerhead was at the time, Buzzwole GX, a tier 1 attacker with the same exact attack, was released 5 years later and only had 10 more HP and a secondary attack that did slightly more than Land's Judgment. Landorus EX set a new standard for what an attacker should be at the time and is rightfully amongst the best fighting type Pokemon of all time. And at number 3, we have Team Magma's Groudon from EX Team Aqua versus Team Magma. This is a 100 HP Pokemon with the Pokebody Power Saver, which prevents it from attacking if there are less than 3 Team Magma Pokemon in play. It has 2 attacks, Linear Attack, which costs 1 colorless and 1 fighting, to deal 20 damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon, and Pulverize, which costs 1 and 2 fighting and deals 50 damage, but does an additional 20 damage if that Pokemon already had 2 more damage counters on it. This spawn on this list basically goes to the entire Team Magma archetype and not just Groudon. But as their main attacker, and also because of his reprint of the 25th anniversary celebrations, Groudon is the most iconic card of the deck and represents the entire archetype for us. EX Team Aqua vs Team Magma was released in March of 2004, but it took all the way until August for the deck to show its true power. Players from Japan had discovered the deck and brought it to the World Championships, and after its performance, no one was ever going to underrate the deck again. In the Masters division, the Team Magma deck ended up taking 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 5th place in addition to a couple over the top 32 appearances. On top of this, it also went in both younger age divisions, with only Japanese players piloting the deck. This kind of dominance from an unknown deck has never been seen since, and the Team Magma deck remained on the top of the game for the near future. This story is one of the most interesting ones about innovation and how easily decks that nowadays would probably immediately be considered great could slip through the cracks and surprise players at tournaments back in the day. And at number 2, we have Claydol from Diamond and Pearl Great Encounters. Its Cosmic Power Pokepower lets you put up to 2 cards at the bottom of your deck to draw cards until you have 6 cards in hand. For 1 Divine Energy and 1 colorless, its spinning attack deals 40 damage, but even for the damage standard at the time, it was far from great. Cosmic Power, however, was incredibly powerful and quickly became the go-to consistency engine for most decks. Back in the Diamond and Pearl era of the game, getting access to your cards was much more based around using supporter cards that search for different pieces of your setup, rather than using powerful draw supporters to draw a ton of cards per turn. Most decks, however, didn't work with just one set of Pokemon line for their entire strategy, which is why decks needed other ways to get their cards online. This is where Pokepowers that provided decks with some of them came in. For the last few years, drawing a couple of extra cards thanks to your Pokemon in play has been a core strategy of most decks. But usually those Pokepowers draw less than 3 cards, or had restrictions put on them that didn't make them generically useful. At that point, Claydol's Cosmic Power was the most powerful and also the most generically usable draw ability in the game. Only having to include a Stage 1 Pokemon that could draw you up to 6 cards every turn that was in play for was incredibly powerful. In fact, it was so powerful that many decks became purely viable because they had easy access to attackers that could take out opposing Claydols, or disrupt them in other ways. Pokemon with attacks that could drag up bench Pokemon or could snipe them were basically automatically made viable, unless they had completely unreasonable restrictions like hefty attack costs. Even as other powerful draw Pokepowers got printed, Claydol remained on top of the game as a consistency option, until it eventually rotated, finding its place in almost every single deck. Claydol will forever go down as one of the best support Pokemon the game has ever seen, which is why it was honored with a reprint in Pokemon's 25th anniversary set celebrations. And finally, at number 1, we've got Archeops from Black and White Noble Victories. Just like many other cards on this list, its power comes from being in play continuously while using other attackers that benefit from its disruptive ability, Ancient Power. This ability prevents both players from playing any of their Pokemon in hand to evolve a Pokemon in play, which is crucial to playing the Pokemon trading card game. This ability would be used in combination with basic attackers to mitigate the negative impact on the player that would use Archeops themselves. Being a Stage 1 Pokemon wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world, but being the final stage of a fossil Pokemon meant that you couldn't just simply put its previous stage, Archeon, into play and evolve the turn after. Nowadays, fossils are trainer cards that are put into play just like basic Pokemon, but back then you had to use Plume Fossil to put Archeon in play with its effect. When played, Plume Fossil checked the bottom 7 cards for any Archeon cards and would put one of them into play. This added a random factor to the usability of fossils, which resulted in most of them being unplayable, even with powerful abilities like Archeops. After waiting for 4 years, Archeops finally got its time in the spotlight when Maxie's Hidden Ball trick was released in X and Y Primal Clash. This card could only be played if it was the last card in your hand, and would put a fighting Pokemon of any stage into your bench while also drawing 5 new cards. As you may notice, both these cards were released in different eras of the game, one in black and white and one in X and Y, which meant they never actually coexisted in the standard format of the Pokemon TCG. 2015 was the first time that the expanded format was introduced, a format that wouldn't care about rotation and just always included every card from black and white onwards. This opened up a lot of new combinations of cards that wouldn't have been possible in the standard format. And one of the first strong expanded exclusive combinations was using Max's Hidden Ball trick to get Archeops into play. While getting down to only one card in hand might not seem super easy, the large access of the item cards at the time that would help you meet this condition made it very easy to get the card in play, if your deck was built around it. Archeops eventually became so oppressive in the expanded format that it caused the introduction of a banned card list to the format, and even today it remains on that list, making it one of the most powerful cards that restricts your opponent from playing the game to make it the best fighting type Pokemon in the Pokemon TCG. Alright, and that's the list. If there's any other cards you think we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.